This pizza is fucking dank, dude.
Faith and Begorra, 'tis time for another episode of Radio Free Ensmith. I don't have any jokes for you this week, or at least not like I usually do. So, I'm gonna do parts of it in a funny accent, to make it more humorous, you fucking Sassenach.
So previously on the Hate Bus, when confronted with the Nietzschean concept of eternal recurrence, my compatriot Snails was like,
I don't like where this is going at all, and I've been reading about it too, but it's just like the idea that like history repeats itself and like we're going through cycles like non-stop.
So, not a big fan. I've often thought that bands themselves and any artistic endeavor undergoes a similar process of growth and decay, but this week, Snails is proven right and I'm proven wrong because we have a band of two brothers. They started out in a band called Execration that was okay. They later left, formed their own band called Akhenaten that was pretty good, and then finally, after being around in music for over a decade, they started up a project called Helleborus that was really great. Most of the time, you get a Morbid Angel or Entombed style career arc in metal where the demos are good, the first few albums are amazing, and then they completely shit the bed and get terrible. But Helleborus proves that you can start out sort of generic and end up getting great. So in essence, they've broken the Nietzschean cycle. Maybe that makes them black metal ubermensch. So, this week we're going to talk about the band Helleborus and their thus far only full-length album, The Carnal Sabbath. But first of all, what the fuck is a Helleborus? Well...
Commonly known as hellebores, the Eurasian plant genus Helleborus consists of approximately 20 species of herbaceous or evergreen perennial flowering plants in the family Ranunculales, within which it gives its name to the Grecian tribe of Helleborei. Despite names such as winter rose, Christmas rose, and Lenten rose, hellebores are not closely related to the rose family. Many hellebore species are poisonous.
So usually, you hear a band is named after a flower and you're like,
Fucking quiz!
But in this case, the name fits them very well. How so? Well, to explain all that, we're going to have to get a little bit Nietzschean. So if you guys remember, a while ago, I talked about the Nietzschean dichotomy between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Apollo, of course, being the Hellenic god of medicine, the sun, and then Dionysus is the god of drunken revelry, the vine, and the harvest. So Apollonian art is very static and concrete. If you look at those old Renaissance era still life paintings, that's kind of the emblematic version of what purely Apollonian art looks like. Meanwhile, Dionysian art can be very vibrant and wild and unpredictable, much like the god himself. It's also very emotional. It can go to both very light and very dark places instead of just being a concrete, easy representation of something. And the best art usually combines the Apollonian and Dionysian virtues in a unique and interesting way. Such is the case with Helleborus. So, the hellebore, as I mentioned earlier, is a plant that is often poisonous. It also grows and flowers in the winter, which in itself is sort of a bizarre inversion of the typical Apollonian natural order, where plants flower during the spring, Helleborus flowers in the dead of the winter, in the middle of death. And like I said before, it's poisonous, so even though plants are supposed to be life-giving, this one takes life away. And yet, if you take it in smaller doses, it can actually be medicinal. The Greeks and the Romans used to use it to treat madness, which they often thought was itself inspired by an excess of Dionysian influence. So we have a very Dionysian band naming themselves after the cure for excess Dionysian energy. So you undertake sort of a Faustian bargain wherein you undergo a smaller death to prevent a greater one. Similarly, black metal takes a lot of negative stuff that is normally suppressed and uses that as fuel to light a fire against the far our greater evil of Western civilization degeneracy. Similarly, the pro-white movement looks into a lot of stuff that is perceived as negative, such as masculine aggression, feelings of xenophobia towards perfidious outsiders, and uses those to combat a greater evil of our own self-imposed genocide. But getting back to Helleborus, they find beauty in places that other people would think are dark and disgusting. So the album, like I said, is called The Carnal Sabbath. It has a lot to do with the contrast between Apollonian and Dionysian natures, and also how those two can be synthesized into a greater balanced whole. You can see this on the album cover itself. In the middle of the album, there is a plant, a Helleborus in fact, growing out of some very Romanesque looking stone, but its roots have the appearance of snakes. Snakes, of course, are a chthonic force in European folklore, going back to the time of the Minoans and the earliest inhabitants of the European continent. It's flanked by a Hellenistic statue of a woman on the left holding what appears to be a dead plant, so death and life juxtaposed. And then the statue's legs are bleeding, but it doesn't really look like blood, it looks like pomegranate juice. So it's as if it's given birth to this plant life, even as it exists in the throes of death. And then on the right, we have a typical Dionysian figure in the form of the satyr. Helleborus is all about taking the ugly sounds of black metal and using them to create something beautiful. To demonstrate this, we'll look at my favorite song off the album, Temple of Seventh Death. But first, I need to go into a little bit of what constitutes standard black metal guitar techniques so you can better understand my upcoming analysis of this track. So, we all know what a musical note is. Here's a C sharp. A scale, of course, is the notes played in sequence. Here's a C sharp minor scale. The spaces between each note in the scale are known as intervals. So if you were to, say, play a fifth, it would be the space between the first note and the fifth note. That's how you get a power chord, is always a fifth. So here is a C sharp power chord. The use of the word chord in the term power chord is a bit of a misnomer because a chord has to have at least 3 notes in it. Some people play power chords with 3 notes, but usually you just play them with 2 notes. So a chord will be several notes from any given scale played at the same time, and the most commonly used chord in black metal is the bar chord, where you bar your finger across all the frets to kind of create a new octave and then put your fingers in a certain configuration under it. So this is what a C sharp minor bar chord sounds like. So then when you play a bunch of chords in sequence, you get a chord progression and eventually you get to a song. But the great innovation of a lot of Scandinavian black metal was to also not only have songs where the melody is based around a chord progression, but within each of the bar chords played, they're making their own little mini melodies by picking out individual notes of the bar chord. So it's a little bit more complex than a lot of death metal stuff at the time was. Here's an example of how you might use individual notes within each bar chord to create kind of a little meta melody going on within the context of the larger chord progression. Also, this is from a song I'm writing now, so please don't fucking steal this shit, you dicks. So I'm picking out individual notes within the chord to create a melody that's going along inside the chord progression. Then I'm doing different bar chords in sequence. So there's 2 things going on. We have the chord progression and then the little melody going on inside the chords. I'm also doing things like hitting the whole chord all at once as an effect. So there's a little bit of counterpoint going on within that riff itself. So with all that said, let's get to how Helleborus does this as we enter the Temple of Seventh Death. So there you hear individual notes being picked out within the bar chords. A little bit of counterpoint going on between the bass and the guitar, and in the background there's another guitar layer that's hitting the whole chord at once. So a lot of varied texture going on here. The drums themselves are doing a little bit of meta melody by varying up what he's doing in conjunction with the guitars. Then we have right channel guitar, tremolo picking, left channel guitar, playing solid bar chords and letting the notes ring out. So it's eerie, and it's very complex in terms of the amount of counterpoint that's going on. Good vocals too. So it's very dark and spooky sounding, but it's also kind of beautiful in a way, with the real kind of emergence of beauty out of this morass is yet to come. So right now we're in the dead of winter, and now this flower is about to sprout and bloom its beauty in defiance of Apollonian nature. Now we're talking. Check out that riff. This whole part's sick. Like, that's some of the best shit I've ever heard in black metal. Everybody should buy this album. This is great. Listen to that. So now it goes back into the dark part again, but you see what I'm talking about there with beauty being found in something that would normally be seen as ugly. A combination of very Apollonian, highly structured musical theory, and then black metal, Dionysian dissonance. There was a really cool counterpoint going on there towards the end between this riff so that's kind of like the initial call, and then here's the response. And that one you can also hear the bass doing a lot of cool melodies separate from the guitar, but also complementing it. Even the drums on this album are fairly complex. They'll often do things where they'll play a guitar part with one drum beat and then keep doing the same guitar part, but bring in a different drum beat, so it gives it a completely different feel. For instance, here's a fast and furious black metal riff accompanied by fast and furious drumming. So, very churning guitar riff, and the churning qualities of it are brought out by the blast beat. Crazy double bass. Good stuff. But then, what happens if you completely switch up the drum beat, keep the guitars the same, but bring on more of a mid-paced stomping beat? So now, the guitar part's the same, but it has a more percussive feel to it because of the drums. The drums are almost cutting up the guitar riff. It's a subtle change, but it really affects the mood of the music. They do a lot of subtle texture variances like that to give their music a real sense of epic narrative journey to it. So, obviously, this album should be beloved by all black metalers, and the black metal community, they kind of liked it, I guess. But as far as the mainstream black metal community analysis of Helleborus goes,
oh no, it smells! It smells so bad I'm gonna hang myself.
So we introduce a new segment onto the program wherein Jub hates on how stupid your average everyday metalhead is, and how I wish that people took the music a little bit more seriously. So to start off with, Helleborus is listed on Metal Archives as symphonic black metal. Symphonic black metal is supposed to be that keyboards are a major melodic voice within the music itself. This is not the case with Helleborus. They use keyboards very occasionally just for texture. They don't even take over as a lead melodic instrument at any point. But because some idiot wanted fucking Metal Archives karma points, they hashed out a half-assed description of what Helleborus was about. You know, they heard like a little bit of keyboard like this. Oh wait, I hear weird noises. That means it must be industrial, right? Fuck out of here. Very good foreboding riff though. So there's like a little bit of keyboard in the background. Here's like the most keyboard on the whole album. You can barely even fucking hear it. It's like, oh, you know, there's fucking keyboards. It must be symphonic, blah. You know, like, By that logic, Depeche Mode is a Chinese folk music band because they use one of those weird Chinese oboes in Everything Counts. You know, like, get the fuck out of here. People are fucking dumb when it comes to reviewing metal, and I'm doing my best to change that in the spirit of Brett Stevens. Like, there's one review for this album on Metal Archives, and it's fucking stupid. He just says, like, oh, this band, he's like, the opener sounds like a recycled Dark Throne riff. So again, he doesn't even describe the music itself. He just says, oh, it sounds like this other band. Like, if you don't know what the fuck Dark Throne sounds like, that's not even helpful. And then he talks about the song Colored Spores of Yuggoth. That's a Lovecraft reference. And he's like, oh yeah, Colored Spores checks off the spacier Lovecraft song box. And there's another track I really enjoyed. Wow, great fucking review there. You see, because it mentioned Lovecraft, that means it's spacey. Also, how does that describe what fucking goes on in that song? This is dumb. You're dumb. Stop being dumb. Try a little bit harder, guys. You piss me off. With that said, go get this Helleborus album. It's really good. See you around.
Play the music, far, 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 far. Play the music, far, 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 far. Play the music, far, 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 far. This music is for love and homosexual. Play the music, far, 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 far. Play the music, far, 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 far. Play the music, far, 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 far. This music, it really fucking self. Every time I hear this shit, I just want to put nails into my testicles.